Hey, hello, good morning. My name is Enrique Palafox. Nice to have you here. I'm with Dacre Stoker. Dacre, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Everything is hot and steamy here in South Carolina, but I know it's not nearly as hot as the action in Dracula is, with things moving towards one of the weirder parts of the book, which is the insane asylum, and Dr. Seward introducing us to probably the strangest character in the whole book, which is R.M. Renfield.
One of my favorites, actually. Let me translate that. Hola, bienvenidos. Nuestra semana 11 en la lectura de Drácula. Estamos ya por arrancar las acciones y vamos a hablar particularmente de un personaje que es increíble, que es R.M. Renfield. Okay, Dacre.
So, Enrique, let's talk about Renfield for a moment, because in a strange way, often I wonder, and I love going to conferences where you're sitting with people like yourself, other Dracula scholars, and you say, why did Bram Stoker put this mental, insane person into the story? You've already got, obviously, the Dracula hunters. Mm-hmm. You've got Dracula, all of his people, his gypsies. Mm-hmm. Why did he put in this insane guy? Mm-hmm. And it just seems to be, until you really look at it, it seems to be an interesting but strange choice. First of all, I want to tell the people that in Bram's notes, and also in the Dracula manuscript, he didn't use the name Renfield until much later in his writing process. He was calling him Fly Man, obviously, because he's eating the flies. Yeah. So the name itself was chosen much later in his process. He wrote the book between 1890 and 1897. Yeah. And we think sometime in late 1896, he chose Renfield. Oh, good. You translate this part, and then I'll explain where he may have got the name from. And then we'll talk about the character.
Bien. El día de hoy estamos entrando con un personaje que es muy interesante porque es la locura, es la representación de la locura que es Renfield, y precisamente Dacre lo que nos va a contar es por qué la decisión de Bram de tener a un personaje completamente loco dentro de toda esta gama de personajes que ya tenía. Si ya tenía gitanos, si ya tenía los cazadores de Drácula, al mismo conde y demás, ¿por qué escoge particularmente a poner a este personaje? Que, por cierto, según las notas que queda constado, acuerden que Bram, su proceso de escritura es de 7 años, de 1890 a 1897, y en las notas de escritura no aparece el nombre de Renfield, sino hasta bastante después, hacia 1896, casi al final de la investigación. Entonces, antes se llamaba Flyman o el hombre mosca, ¿no? Por su afición a comer moscas. Okay, Dacre.
So, the name possibly came from two sources, maybe more, but the two most obvious sources was this. In Whitby, which the action in the story is now shifting to, chapter 6, 7, and 8, we know Bram took a holiday there, but that was early in 1890. He had the holiday. So not really sure if this is a good explanation, but there was a monk named Renfred. Renfred, that was quite a well-known monk at the Whitby Abbey. It's possible that he came across that name. The other name was the name of a street in Glasgow, Scotland, right at the area where the train arrives and the hotel where Bram Stoker used to stay with Henry Irving when they'd go to Glasgow, Scotland to do their plays, which they did a lot. And it was called Renfield Street.
Renfield Street.
And I did the research to find that it was called Renfield Street back in the day when Bram Stoker and Henry Irving went there. So who knows? Maybe it came from other sources. Maybe it was Renfield Street. Maybe it was the monk Renfred. But we just, it's better than Flyman, obviously, because
Definitely.
yeah, it looks like he has the temperament and the characterization of a real person, doesn't he? So,
and phonetically, Renfield is a very attractive name, and he goes to upload his character, putting the RM Renfield, so he gets personality to the name.
And we find out in the wonderful scene in chapter 21 when Renfield is having the surgery, the brain trepitation surgery by Seward and Van Helsing, that he's talking to the band of heroes like Holmwood and says, "Oh yes, my father put you up at this certain club." So it sounds like Renfield, Mr. R.M. Renfield, actually has a sophisticated background. He comes from a good family, and so he's a real person. So why don't you translate that part, and then we'll go a little deeper.
What was the name of the monk? Just to translate it correct.
It's called Renfrid.
Renfred, ok, thank you. Lo que estamos platicando es que hay dos alternativas para que Bram hubiera venido con el nombre de Renfield. La primera es un monje de la abadía precisamente de Whitby, donde sabemos que pasó sus vacaciones, pero es muy al principio, donde había un monje que se llama Renfred. Y ahí esa puede ser una referencia, pero no está muy ligada. La que sí, Dacre sí tiene constancia, porque la investigó él, es que precisamente cuando Bram viajaba con Henry Irving ¿was it Glasgow?
Yeah.
Cuando viajaba a Glasgow en Escocia y se quedaban ahí, había una calle que se llamaba Renfield, precisamente. Entonces es muy probable que de ahí se haya tomado el nombre, pero lo que es interesante es cómo Bram le genera un cierto contexto al personaje, no nada más es el loco, sino que le da un cierto contexto, ¿no? De que el tipo tenía mundo y tenía, bueno, pues cierta clase social, ¿no? Que era muy importante. Ok, go on.
So now let's talk about just madness in general, okay? Back in the Victorian era, there was a lot of people who had mental illness, just like we have today. But in those days, the doctors really didn't understand mental illness. They thought this was a form of evil, possibly that the devil has gotten into them and that they are bad people and that they need to be put away in these, some cases in dungeons, in cellars. They weren't able to be trained properly or fixed or made healthy again. They didn't understand this. And in some cases there was actually, physical operations on the brain to fix their mental illness.
Yeah. And that kind of experiments in the head.
Yeah. So we know that Bram Stoker was concerned about this. We know that his brother Thornley Stoker was a doctor that worked both as a physical doctor and also in a mental hospital. And we know that he did some of these operations. It wasn't like he was a bad person. He was trying to figure this out. We also know that Thornley Stoker's wife did also get committed to an insane asylum. So she had a mental illness. So it would have been very close to the Stoker family, both from Thornley Stoker being the doctor as well as Emily being the patient. And we also know that Bram Stoker went to visit certain prisons where mental people were sent because he wanted to try to understand what was all this about. So in a way, I've answered my own question. Bram Stoker needed to include this fascination with evil and the devil as the halfway in between, I think, Count Dracula and normal people. And so he's got this link, this intermediary, which is Renfield. Sometimes he's very normal. Sometimes he's not. And what gives horror to people is, obviously, you don't know the difference when the man is going to switch from being good and normal to evil. That is horrifying. And I think that's maybe why he put it in there. maybe translate that, then I want to hear your opinion on why you think he's in the story.
Yeah, wonderful. Ok, aquí estamos hablando, ¿no? De una obsesión que además era muy común en la época, ¿no? Las enfermedades mentales que eran muy comunes, igual que las tenemos al día de hoy, pero en ese entonces simplemente no se entendían. Entonces se les atribuían cuestiones demoníacas, ¿no? Cuestiones de posesión, la gente no entendía por qué estaban estas enfermedades. Entonces lo más fácil era recluirlos en estos sanatorios, ¿no? Y entonces meterlos como en estas jaulas y bueno, pues los tratamientos eran simplemente brutales. Eran momentos de la medicina, de evolución, no es que fueran malas personas, simplemente estaban haciendo investigación y eso llevaba a ciertas operaciones que eran pues bastante crueles en su momento. Hablamos un poco de lobotomía, donde bueno, pues se trataba de estudiar al cerebro, ¿no? Entonces, en esa obsesión, bueno, Bram lleva su investigación en muchos sentidos, ¿no? Porque visita los mismos hospitales para entender esto, visita otras cárceles, porque, bueno, pues también su hermano, había una connotación muy importante en la familia, porque recordemos que el hermano Thorley era médico y se dedicaba tanto a enfermos físicos como enfermos mentales, ahí había una relación. Y por el otro lado, bueno, su esposa fue recluida en uno de estos sanatorios, entonces también hay una cuestión familiar metida otra vez en la novela. Entonces aquí hay punto de encuentro entre el mal y el bien, porque Renfield eso es lo que implica. Este es un personaje que a veces es malo, a veces es bueno en esta locura, y este es el switch. Entonces puede ser un puente entre esta obsesión que hay por el gran mal y todo lo que habla Bram Stoker. My impression with Renfield is that now I am getting more convinced that maybe Bram is taking this vampirism like a possession, like a demonic possession. Normally, vampirism in the media is taken as a disease, a blood disease, or a virus who you can get infected, very fit to this type of moments we are living. But I'm quite sure that Bram's point of view of this vampirism is more like a possession thing, like more than a sickness or something. And Renfield is that level of patient which is getting crazier. And then he will turn into vampire if he will have the time. But
yeah, I think you're onto something. Obviously, we've got to keep this in the context of when Bram wrote the novel and what people knew about vampirism at the time. There was very much, this kind of unknown theories, superstitious world, occult world of what could be happening after death. Obviously, there's no scientific proof for this, but it's sort of open-minded people believe that the spirit exists. But what about bad spirits? What about the nasty, evil spirits that are not at rest? And therefore, if that evil spirit then gets into somebody else, like Dracula's spirit has gotten into Renfield so he can do the bidding for the Count as the Count is getting closer to London, as he gets closer to Purfleet, where the asylum is, Renfield does portray more, as you said, more madness. He gets more crazy or does more wild things as the Count is getting close. And to the point where he obviously is uncontrollable, like a mad person is, and he starts talking too much about where the Count is, and the Count gets angry and comes into the cell as the mist, and then comes to life and has a confrontation and beats up Renfield, where he has to have the brain hemorrhage surgery, and then he, of course, dies. But what's interesting is we don't get a clear view that he was ever turned into a vampire, do we? We just, it's one of those loose ends that is hanging out there. What happens if Renfield did give blood? We don't have any indication there was a blood exchange, and therefore we don't know if Renfield could come out later and his spirit comes out and becomes a vampire or not. So that's one of the cool hanging things that Bram left there.
Yeah.
And to be discussed later, I guess.
Yeah, but actually there is no reference about any kind of vampirism in Renfield.
No, it's more like you said, a possession, a demonic possession that makes him one of the minions of Dracula without the blood exchange.
Ya, ok. Estamos platicando de esta condición maligna de la locura de Renfield, ¿no? Entonces, este personaje que, bueno, pues precisamente discutimos que probablemente el vampirismo desde el punto de vista de Bram era una cuestión más de posesión demoníaca que una cuestión de enfermedad. En muchos medios se ha tratado el vampirismo casi como un virus, ¿no? Que es, te infecto y entonces ya todo el mundo se contagia, pero cada que platicamos, Dacre y yo llegamos a esta conclusión de que, bueno, el maligno tiene un papel fundamental en la obra. Entonces, Renfield se establece como este gran loco, ¿no? Que está siendo poseso, ¿no? Por el conde Drácula y que se convierte en una herramienta para el conde Drácula para hacer lo que él quiere. Nada más que en el momento que se vuelve demasiado loco y habla de más, pues ahí es en el momento que el conde dice hasta aquí y bueno, pues para con eso, ¿no? Cuando se convierte en neblina y bueno, tiene unos ataques más adelante. Ya regresaremos a eso, pero bueno, es muy evidente que el mal está presente y que Bram lo tenía como un recurso literario para introducir a este personaje. Okay.
So let's leave Renfield because we're going to get back to him much later in the story when the action really picks up.
Yep.
And as the action will turn later to Whitby, and we've talked a lot about the arrival of the Demeter and so on. But I think what would be interesting today, Enrique, let's share with some of the viewers when you and I get inspired by some of the action in the book, some of these images of Whitby, and how you as a graphic artist have actually turned some of these cool images that are in our minds, in our discussions, and put them in products that we put for sale at the Dracula store. Can you lead people through one of your latest artistic sort of inspirations and how it made its way onto the products?
Definitely, and it is very important for people to know that we are not designing this randomly. We are not designing this by likeness or whatever this can be put into design. This is actually an effort to translate Bram's work into design objects. And that is very important because you are an expert, and I consider myself a scholar in Dracula. So we have a very solid background in research in Dracula. So these elements of designs that we are putting is very interesting because we are making a complete translation of Bram's work into ideas. So let's share a screen. Let me share the screen with the audience so we can see what we are talking about. Let's go to Photoshop, which is our most friendly tool. And this is a design that we are developing, inspired in Whitby, actually. So the first thing to have in mind is which kind of products are we aiming to develop with Bram Stoker's work. In this scenario, in this case, we are going to design a pillow to have in your home. So the starting point is black because of it's obvious. This is a very recurrent element in Dracula. Black should be very linked with the character because of the evil, which is very related, because of the night, which is when he has his full powers. So black is very important to have it on the background. On the next stage, we have the next layer, which is this kind of vintage lace, because lace was very representative of the Victorian era. And lace is very related with women. So to have this lace and in white color, it represents actually Lucy. This kind of the openness, this kind of she's very transparent, she's very innocent. So white is the best color to represent them. So then came the incident with Count Dracula. And Count Dracula, it's a very powerful character because media has developed him as a very romantic figure. But as we have always talked about in our conversations, Dracula is a very evil one. So we're talking about a very cruel character. He is not there to seduce Lucy. He's taking her because she fits her purpose. So that is represented with the blood. And then we have, obviously, Count Dracula represented in this beautiful bat that we have worked together. This was taken from actual scientific illustrations from the area, so to be very representative with the time frame of Bram's work. And obviously it resumes everything that is Dracula. On the later side, we have the logo, which is very representative. I really enjoy working with this logo because this is smelled like the original. This is nothing but what Bram has it in his own hands, you know. This is definitely Dracula logo. And the colors that we always pick on are based on the first edition. The yellow, as you can explain, represents sickness, represents a lot of things. And in this context, we have this beautiful black and white contrast and with the yellow. How do you think about this?
Well, I think it's wonderful when you run through the explanation. It shows this sort of the vulnerability of Lucy and this lace, but with the black behind it, and then not just two little spots of red, but a bloody mess, which is more of the sort of the realism of how messy Dracula is. He's not just a polite little biter. He's going to really go in for a lot of blood when he's involved.
And the hunters are into the blood also.
Yeah.
No. So and if we go to our store, we can see how this design translated to these pillows. And I really enjoy doing this because this fits perfectly in a place, you know. You can have a piece of Bram Stoker's work in your home.
Yeah, and it's great because we've now got pillows with different Dracula covers on it, Dracula's guest, the boxes of dirt, and now we've got something representing, you know, some of the scenes in Whitby. And I know maybe next week we'll show some more products working on, because Whitby was such a big part of Bram's story. He originally was going to have the Count arrive in the town of Dover, which he went to his holiday in Whitby in 1890 and loved it so much that he changed it and set his story to arrive, the Count to arrive in Whitby. And that has really changed the town dramatically, because other than Captain Cook, who sailed from Whitby, Dracula is the next most famous element of this town, along with wonderful fish and chips and the Whitby Abbey, of course. So yeah, we should see you guys next week, and we'll be talking more about as the action picks up in the town of Whitby, and we'll see what happens when the Count makes his arrival.
Okay, let me translate very briefly what we are doing. Nada más para no entrar mucho detalle, lo que vimos fue el proceso de diseño cada uno de los elementos que están puestos ahí representan algo de la novela. Esto no es un trabajo de gusto, no estamos diseñando por gusto, sino tratamos de representar lo que Bram hace, y esto es la riqueza del trabajo que hacemos en la tienda de Drácula. El negro del fondo representa la noche, representa al conde Drácula. El blanco del encaje representa a Lucy, por su inocencia, y además el encaje, bueno, pues es muy femenino y además muy representativo de la época victoriana. La sangre representa la brutalidad de Drácula, evidentemente, y el vampiro, pues es Drácula, no hay de otra. Y utilizamos el logo, que es el logo que Bram tuvo en sus manos, porque, bueno, pues eso es lo más correcto para hacerle honor al trabajo de Drácula, que por cierto, bueno, pues ya pueden ir visitando la tienda para adquirir todo este tipo de productos. Dacre, thank you so much for this nice conversation.
Okay, bye-bye, see you next week.
See you soon. Nos vemos la siguiente. Muchas gracias. Hasta pronto. Gracias.